Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to be talking about teaching English online. And I think I just touched on this a second ago, that I've kind of, since the beginning, I've been in ELT for 17 years, and I started teaching almost exclusively online from the kind of the beginning of the pandemic. And I used to think of online learning as a bit like the poorer cousin of in-person teaching. And I don't feel like that at all. I think that by harnessing the right techniques and the right activities that might be specific to the online space, we can make our online teaching extremely engaging. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. If you don't mind, just write to me in the chat box. Just say yes if you can see that okay. All right. Great. Okay, wonderful. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be, in the next 30 minutes, we're going to be exploring some simple ways to enhance your virtual presence in the live online classroom, some simple methods for engaging your learners, and also some ideas for maximizing class time and enriching the learning experience. I'd like to start with a poll. So could we please launch that poll? That's wonderful. Great. Okay, so please take us a moment to answer those questions. So number one, how long have you been teaching English online? And number two, what do you find most challenging about teaching online? All right, fabulous. If you put something else, please go ahead now and share your something else in the chat box while we let the rest of us vote in the poll. Great. Okay. That's super. Okay, interesting. All right, so I can see there's a massive range of experience from less than 1 year to over 10 years. Fantastic. And I would say the most common challenge is making lessons engaging. Fabulous. And secondly, it's coming in at maintaining rapport. Very good. So today, I hope we can address kind of those two challenges, the biggest challenges that you have. I can see also we've got a massive range of experience, and I very much hope that the session will offer something useful for both our teachers that are new to online teaching, as well as our more seasoned online teachers. All right, so let's have a look. Firstly, let's talk about some simple ways to enhance your virtual presence. You might see, by the way, you might recognize this illustration on the right. That's by one of my favorite artists, David Shrigley. And his work is just really, really good fun. And I found a few ways to kind of incorporate his work just to illustrate some of the points that I'm going to be making in this presentation. So back to simple ways to enhance your virtual presence. So in the physical classroom, we've got the advantage that our learners can really see a lot of us, right? They can see our whole body. They can see how we use the space, how we dominate the space. They can see all of our gestures and all of our body language. But in the online classroom, that is actually reduced to a tiny little two-dimensional rectangle, particularly if students are kind of using the gallery view, like you can see here. So how can we use that little rectangle to our webcam image to the best of our ability? How can we maximize it to make sure our learners still feel engaged with us and still see that we're human and we're very much there? Well, don't do this, and don't do this. And these are things I kind of see quite a lot, actually, when I observe teachers, and kind of doing things like this. So having like the light source coming from behind, so you're shadowing your face and not showing your whole face, can potentially cause a barrier for students really connecting with you. It's difficult for us to connect with somebody if we can't see their face very well. So some tips. Try something like this. So this is a speaker I really love seeing. And when he speaks, this is Dr. Luke Hobson, he kind of positions himself in a really lovely way in his webcam. And I took this image and I applied the thirds principle to that. And so that's kind of the principle of thirds is used in photography and visual arts to help us get a nicely distributed composition. And you can see that Luke Hobson, if we apply that here, he's basically got his eye line along that top third. And he looks kind of aesthetically pleasing in that webcam rectangle. So that works really, really well to try to do that. Also, he's well lit. He's got the light source coming from in front of him. And he also, like I tried to do, he uses larger than life gestures and body language to kind of really maximize that, that rectangle. And finally, you can see that he's really considered his background. So he's chosen to go for kind of books and I guess some things to even promote himself. Some teachers like to use maybe pictures of artwork or plants, which also really works as a webcam background. I'd say one thing that we want to do, and it's also quite, valid to just use the white space behind you. We do want to make sure that our background isn't too distracting, because that can be particularly distracting as well, perhaps for our neurodiverse learners. I'm going to show you a couple of ways. If you feel like you don't have, in the place where you teach or where you want to teach, you don't have an appropriate space to work in or an appropriate background, you can go to canva.com and you can get some customizable Zoom backgrounds. And likewise, at sites like livestorm.co, you can download some really nice Zoom backgrounds to use for your online teaching platform. Okay, so let's move on to our next session. All right, so methods for engaging your learners. So in the online classroom, your students potentially are going to be having a lot of distractions, right? So they might have kids, they might have partners around, they might be getting distracted by their phones and maybe other websites there, and emails coming in. So there are potential distractions, but we know that in order for successful learning to take place, students need to be active participants and they need to be engaged in the lesson, right? So how do you get and keep your learners engaged in your online lessons? Can you take a moment to reflect on that question? And if you feel comfortable, please go ahead and write your answer to the question in the chat box. That's great. Fantastic. Yeah, lovely. So I can see Helen says using a quiz poll. Yeah, absolutely, Helen. Yeah, absolutely. Using a quiz or a poll is kind of instantly get someone active in the lesson, and it allows them to bring in a little bit of personalization from the outset. Fantastic. Using interactive tools, absolutely. A quiz like Kahoot. Fantastic. Great. And another, one is asking them questions, right? So keeping them in the main room, asking them questions, or even better, putting them in breakout rooms to discuss those questions. Lovely. All right. I'm going to show you something really, really simple and low prep that you can do. So this is an idea. So let's take a piece of learning material, right? So this is from Macmillan's Pivot English. So this is the fully online English course that Will spoke about earlier on. And this is the material. We're going to be looking at the lesson for B2 on personality and describing personality. And so in the lesson materials, in the guided learning section, the students are reading a text. And then they're going on and they're getting some controlled practice of language for describing personality, right? So one way to engage learners in this lesson to talk about personality would be to do what I'm about to do now, all right? So in the next bit, I'm going to actually do a demo. So I'd like you to feel like, and I want you to get into the role of being my B2 language learners for this, okay? Can you go ahead and do that? Get into the role of a B2 language learner. All right, and let's get started. Okay, super. All right, please can you now, I know you're all at home, so please can you now run and find an object in your home that you feel represents your personality? I can give you 30 seconds for that, so please go ahead and run and do that. I'm going to do that now too. Okay, great. So about 10 seconds left. Great. And if you're back and you found your object like me, can you just go ahead and write it in the chat box. That's lovely. Good. A pen, lovely. Docking station. Wow, I don't know what that is. Okay, good. My cat. Okay. Yeah, it can be a live animal. That's fine. A cat. Wonderful. All right, fantastic. That's lovely. A pencil. Okay, great. Lovely. And so kind of one thing we might do, so if you were my real live language learners, of course, what we'd do, we'd have our cameras on and we'd all be showing each other our what we found, right? And then what I would do is I'd get them talking, right? So I might do a demo, say why I feel like I'm like a plant, and then I might put them into breakout rooms and get them talking maybe for about 5 minutes about why they chose their object. All right. Great. Let me know in the chat box if this is something, maybe it's something you've done already. This is a common online language learning activity. So let me know if you've done it before or if you'd like to try out the activity. Not really. Okay, great. Very nice, not yet. Okay, do definitely give it a go. I love it because it's low prep. And I also really like it because it does two things. So one thing, it gets learners out of their seats, yeah, and away from that screen, gives them a break from the screen time. And also it gets them using their home environment, their space in their home environment. So let's have a look at these two things a bit more, yeah? So getting our students moving. So getting our students moving isn't meaningless at all in the online learning space. In fact, neuroscience research shows us that actually moving about every 20 to 30 minutes is recommended to reduce screen fatigue and also maintain focus and boost cognitive function. Yeah, so there is definitely a reason for doing it. So the activity we've just done now is a great one you can do, and you can adapt that for learners of all levels. Something I do as well is in lessons, if it gets to kind of the 30-minute mark, I might just get my students to stand up and just do a stretch just for 60 seconds. Another thing you can do if you feel like you know your students and you've got some brave students, you can ask a student as a volunteer to lead an exercise routine for the group. Another idea, a virtual dance party. At the end of kind of perhaps a lesson or a lesson segment, perhaps get your students to choose a song, play the song and let them dance or move around the room to the song. And of course, they get to choose if they want to keep their cameras on or off for that. And one more idea, yeah, total physical response. You've probably heard of this, and if you teach young learners, I'm sure you do it a lot. So total physical response, of course, being giving commands or getting students to move based on meaningful input. So for example, it can be something really simple. You can get all of your students to stand up, and you could, be focusing on a particular language area like the past simple. So sit down if you went out for lunch last weekend. Sit down if you went on holiday, if you went away for the weekend, etc., etc. So there's 4 ideas there. Just put in the chat box which one you'd most like to try, which one you think would most work for your learners. Great. Dancing. Okay. Great. Okay. Super. TPR. Fantastic. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So now let's move on to looking a bit more at exploiting your learner's home environment. I really like this because, in the physical classroom, we don't actually have we have a shared classroom environment, but we don't have each student's having their own home or study environment to really exploit. So we can really take advantage of this in the online online learning space. So getting students to work with the environment around them can allow opportunities for students to share information about themselves, and that can build their rapport more between other students in the class and with the teacher. And also it gets them to use language in a real life context. So using language in a really meaningful way. So a few ideas that will help us for using the learner's environment in the online online teaching. So let's have a look. So one nice one, what's in your fridge? get students to go to their fridge and describe the contents of their fridge. For example, I've got loads of fruit and vegetables. I've got hardly any milk. I've got just a little bit of butter, etc., etc. Yeah, so really nice for quantifiers, for practicing quantifiers and lexis for food. All right, scavenger hunt. So this is an activity where you can generate some prompts, perhaps prompts that recycle vocabulary that students have already seen in class, right? Or perhaps prompts to practice adjectives. Students need to go and find objects in their home that are, depending on the prompts, right? So you can say maybe for higher level learners, it could be adjectives using prefixes, right? So find an object in your home that you consider outdated. Find an object that you think is overrated, yeah, etc., etc. And then what students can do after they've found the objects and they've got them on their desk, they can then go into breakout rooms, maybe talk about their objects. Yeah, I chose this. I felt this is outdated because blah 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 blah. Right. Okay, and a virtual tour. So students can give a virtual tour of their whole apartment, or perhaps a particular room, or one part of the room, or whatever I guess they feel comfortable sharing. We can also, and this is a bit wild, isn't it? Get students to do a cooking class. So this can be as elaborate as we want it to be. So if it could be something really, really simple, we could, using the ingredients that most students will have in their home, like bread, butter, or oil, and some fillings. We could get students to make a really simple sandwich. Or we could set up this activity in a more elaborate way, kind of like a project. We could get each student to make a small recipe, yeah, get the other students in the class to buy those items, and the student can talk through a cooking class, and everybody synchronously makes the dish following their instructions. And so it's a really nice one for practicing, of course, lexis for food, and also sequencing language, yeah, like then, next, and also the imperatives that we might use when we're giving instructions for preparing food. All right, lovely. I'm going to ask you to do the same as before. Can you write in the chat box which idea you think you'd most likely to try? Lovely, the cooking class. Okay, great. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, lots of you chose cooking. That's lovely. Yeah, I do find cooking and food, it's a way that really bonds people. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. All right. So let's have a look at we're going to kind of move into the third section. So ideas for maximizing class time and enriching the learning experience. So it's quite common with a talk with, in a setting like this, if we're talking about online learning, people often talk about language learning apps. And I love language learning apps, and I get very excited about them. But my advice is, can use language learning apps sparingly and judiciously. So sometimes learning a new language, learning a new app will require quite a bit of cognitive processing, right? And that might detract from the cognitive processing students need to do with the language and the tasks of the class. So think about, is the app really needed here? Is it really supporting language, the language learning goals or the outcome of the activity? In this section, I talk about a couple of ideas, and I will mention language learning apps, but more as a kind of means to achieve the learning objective of the activity itself. So let's take a look. All right, so something I'm going to talk about now is flipped learning. Can I ask you to, in the chat box, share your definition of flipped learning? Yeah, and if you don't want to share that, just think about what it might be. Great. Okay. Fantastic. Edda, thank you very much for being brave and going first. Yeah, that's great. Lovely. And Nat says students read or study beforehand. Absolutely. Okay, super. Putting some responsibility on students, Adam. Absolutely. Okay. Great. Okay, super. So a lot of you are aware of what this is already. So like you said, flipped learning, it kind of flips the more traditional approach on its head. So in the more traditional classroom, what we might do is in class, the class comes first with the teacher support, and the teacher might introduce content, and learners will process that content, right? And here they might be processing the content using lower order thinking skills, right? So understanding the content, remembering it, they might start to apply it. And then at home, they would then probably go and practice that content, and they might do something like a project, or they might kind of really extend what they're doing with the content. And at home they would actually use typically the higher order thinking skills, right? So they might create something, they might do some evaluation. The flipped approach, as you said, starts with students doing the work at home, and they start by actually they're assigned learning material to access before the lessons, such as reading or videos. And so they process the content before class, and they're processing the content to some degree at their own pace. And then in class, that kind of frees up time for students to continue engaging with the content through activities that are possibly more cognitively challenging, such as debates, or activities that require higher order thinking skills and critical thinking skills. And this allows for deeper understanding and real practical application. So really, it's a great way of maximizing that classroom time. Also, it means the teacher can actually be better prepared to react to the students' needs. So students might read and process the content for homework, maybe come with questions, and the teacher can be on hand to support them as they need. And of course, flipped learning, it can be done in the physical classroom as well. But I would say this approach lends itself really well to online learning, as it's really easy to share materials and share content for students to do at home. So a few ways that we could implement this, right? So the most obvious one is give students an article or a listening text to read. So a podcast or a TED Talk can work really well here. And we do want to, as we would in the physical classroom, we definitely need to give them a task to do when they process that, right? So perhaps a gist task, or respond to some specific questions. And then in class, students come in and they discuss the key ideas. Maybe they debate the topics in the listening text or in the article. Another thing we can do is we can create an instructional video, perhaps where we describe a target, or we go over or teach a target language area. So we could use a tool like Loom or Flipgrid to do that. And then students kind of watch that video, they might write down questions. In class, then more time is freed up for students to have a practice of that target language. And then finally, another idea, give your students the task of researching a topic of interest, right? Making key points on that topic. And then in class, they could come in and actually organize their notes into a presentation, practice presentations, and then perform presentations in the class. All right, so that was 3 ideas for integrating the flipped approach. And I would say, like, something that's really nice about the flipped approach is because students are processing the content at home in their own time in a flexible way. They're able to take the time they need or process the content in the way that helps them. So I find, for example, when I'm given like a challenging article to read, what I tend to do is I really take my time reading it, and I highlight bits and I make a mind map from the content. And that takes a lot of time, and I'm not always able to do that in the classroom, because I'm working at a different pace to others. All right, let's move on now to our final kind of focus of the day, which is reflection on language learning. So what I'd like you to do is just put in the chat box, what is reflective language learning? What does that mean to you? Yeah, lovely. Okay, super. Yeah, great. I love that. Okay. Owanis's process of developing metacognitive skills in language learning helps develop learner autonomy. God, I think that was really well expressed, Owana. Thank you. All right. Wonderful. Let's have a look. So, you're absolutely right. So, reflection on language learning, according to the authors of Promoting Reflection on Language Learning, is the process of thinking deeply about one's language learning to understand the processes to take informed and self-regulated action towards language outcomes. So in short, that means thinking carefully about how you're learning to take effective steps to reach your language learning goals. So let's have a look at a few ideas that come from the authors. Firstly, they say that building in, we need to encourage our students to reflect regularly, on language learning, maybe perhaps at the end of each lesson and perhaps at, each core learning moment. And of course, this can be done online and in the face-to-face environment, but the ideas here are kind of, I'm going to focus on kind of how you could encourage reflection in the online space. So one idea would be to respond to written prompts. So what we could do is at the end of a lesson, we could give our learners some written prompts, like the ones I've got here. And we can ask them to perhaps respond to them in the chat box. Perhaps we could also make it dialogic. We could also get them to go into breakout rooms and discuss their responses to the questions. Another idea, so at the end of a unit, we could get our learners to write a reflection. They could share that with their partner, and the partner could give them advice on perhaps how to continue, what maybe next steps to take as a language learner. Another one would be using a task checklist or task criteria. So I really like this idea. And in fact, in the online classroom, what you can do is, let's say you have a task such as giving a short talk, right? So giving a short talk on your job. We can first work with our learners and get them to together generate a checklist for what you need to do to give a short talk effectively, right? So it could be pronounce your key words effectively. It could be using intonation in an engaging way, right? So together we kind of come up with this checklist. And then students have that checklist to use to plan the task, for when they're doing the task. And they can also use that checklist for peer evaluation and a post-reflection activity. And then finally, my last idea, reflective journaling. So journals can keep a reflective weekly journal on their language learning journey. You could do this in a purely text-based way, or we could do this using something like, we could encourage students to use more visual journaling, using a tool like Padlet, for example. And I quite like the idea of combining both. So if students are using visuals in their journaling, it actually means that they might not always have the language to express themselves when they're reflecting, but they can use visuals to help them do this. I'm going to show you. So this last idea, I've done quite a lot, and I do quite a bit of work with within the kind of helping art and design students with their academic skills. And with the courses that I work on, we actually get our students to make a reflective journal where they add an entry every week. And I'm not allowed to show you one of the real journals, right? Because it's quite personal, but I kind of mocked up one that looks a bit like what they might do. So this is kind of using Padlet. Yeah, so something like this. So this kind of looks like what a typical reflective journal that they might do. Okay, all right. So that brings us close to the end, right? So just to recap, Today, we've had a look at some simple ways to enhance our virtual presence, and namely making the most of our webcam image. We then had a look at methods for engaging learners. So one of those being getting learners moving, and the other thing being exploiting learners' home environment. And finally, a couple of ideas for maximizing class time and enriching the learning experience. So those were using the flipped classroom approach and getting students to reflect on language learning. All right, so thank you very much for being very participative and a great online audience.